Gosh, it's fantastic to see everybody joining. I'm just going to go and get my my phone so I can see the time at the same time as showing my screen. Be back in a mo. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It's fantastic to see you all in this event, which is a first for, I think, for the OR Society as well as for the Women in OR and Analytics Network. I'm Ruth Kaufman, and I'm really pleased to be briefly introducing this event. And it won't take me long to introduce it. I'll just say a few words about the programme for today and a bit of the background about the Women in OR and Analytics Network for those of you who are new to the Women in OR and Analytics Network. And then I'll hand over to Sonya, Crowe, and in particular, Dr. Alice White, who we're delighted is joining us today. So if we can move on then, the programme is very straightforward. I'm just going to spend a few minutes reminding you about the wonderful thing that is the Women in OR and Analytics Network. And I can see that the chair of the network, Frances O'Brien, has also joined us. She didn't think she'd be able to make it in time to do the intro, hence you got me. But welcome, Frances, as well as, of course, welcome everybody. So we will have a feedback form as well in the usual way afterwards, and I shall plug it now because it's really, really helpful for us to have feedback for when we're planning future events. And it's also nice to be able to go back and tell the presenters what, well, it's usually nice to tell the presenters what people thought. Of course, you can't guarantee that. So just a few words about the Women in OR and Analytics Network for those of you who are new. It's been going for 2 or 3 years now, and is sponsored by some of the prominent universities and companies that are prominent in the OR community, I should say, or OR and analytics community. And we're very grateful to them, especially when we have physical events that they can help pay for. Not so much difference just now when they can't provide us with a glass of wine to keep us going. So since lockdown, we've been organising a whole series of online events meant to give us a chance to hear from each other, to learn from each other, and to make sure that women's voices are heard, to give us a chance to meet people when we can't, we want to get outside our normal working environment and meet other people with similar interests, in particular other women, but this is open to women and men. So whoever you are, whatever your sex or your gender, you're very welcome. To help us build networks, that's one of the key areas that women can often feel that they're lagging behind in, actually building your network of people you can turn to and just exchange ideas with, or ask for support, or bounce things off, just know. And finally, they are all meant to be enjoyable, and I'm pretty certain that this event is not going to be any exception to that rule. So all of our previous events have, or almost all of them, have been recorded. Some of them have been almost entirely Chatham House rule, and you can't see them, but most of them have been recorded, as is this one, and you can see them on the YouTube, the OR Society's YouTube channel. You can find the WORAN playlist, or you can just browse amongst the items there. Our forthcoming programme, I'm delighted to say that we've got Christina Pargel, Professor Christina Pargel, who's the Director of the Clinical Operational Research Unit and who is a member of Independent SAGE, coming to talk to us on May the 18th, reflecting on her experience of communications and OR in the last year or so. Many of you will probably have seen her or heard her on the mainstream media, and one of the things that she'll be talking to us about is the experience of sticking your head above the parapet when issues are high profile and heated. And I think we should all be interested to hear more about that. We have a joint event in June with the Southern OR group, at which I'll be saying a bit more about what WORAN's influence in time of COVID, and Sally Brailsford will be talking about her weird career. And then hopefully in July, we will be having a session on demystifying LinkedIn with Hazel Mutar, I think, sorry, the name went for a minute, who some of you will have heard at last month's wonderful lightning talk session. So I think that is all that I want to say. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Alice and Sonya. So Dr. Alice White is the Wikimedian in residence at the Wellcome Foundation, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about how she got to this stage and what she's doing. Can I encourage you all to put your videos back on if you've got the bandwidth? Keep your mics off because we don't want to hear you. But it's really nice if we can see you. One of the things about WORAN meetings is that they are about people, not about words, and so it's great. Thank you very much. It also helps Alice to make more of a connection. I think it's horrible giving a talk to this kind of blank screen. So Alice will be talking more about how she got to be where she is, but we're particularly grateful to Alice for coming along because she's currently on maternity leave and is strongly recommending that editing Wikipedia is something that goes well with being up in the middle of the night doing I won't say what. And I'd also like to thank Sonya Crowe, who's the Deputy Director at the Clinical Operational Research Unit, and who was the brains and organizer behind this session, and who is also about to go on to maternity leave. So congratulations from all of us, Sonya, and especially from me, and is obviously just refreshing her Wikipedia skills before she goes on to maternity leave, because that's the most important thing. So I'm going to hand over now. Very welcome. Thanks very much, Dr. Alice White.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It's lovely to see you, whether that's your names or your faces. I understand that some of you won't be able to put your cameras on, and that's totally fine, but if you can and are happy to, then it's very nice to see you. This is going to be quite an informal session, so I'm going to teach you hopefully all of the foundational skills that you will need. But at any point, please do feel free to ask questions in the chat, or else to put your microphones on and interrupt me and say, hang on a minute, I need to know more about this, or I have a question about what you just said. Please let me know if you have any questions at any point at all today. It would be great to hear the questions. So I think we have a poll for you to find out what your levels of experience with Wiki currently are, to give me a bit of a baseline to understand while I run this session. So hopefully we can activate that poll so that people can be letting us know how much editing they've done before. As Ruth said, my job is Wikimedian in residence, which is the daftest job title I think anyone's ever held. And a digital editor at Wellcome. So the short version of what I do is to help people get ideas and knowledge and make it more accessible to more people online. So usually I'm working with people who have very specialized, very interesting knowledge to try and get that to broader audiences, to make it more accessible and give it a much greater reach. And at Wellcome, a big part of what I do is also thinking about whose knowledge is accessible and whose ideas are shared, how we can be a bit more equitable about that, and how we can use that as quite an empowering tool to make sure that things are a bit more diverse. You know, the internet isn't always the place that we would like it to be. And so, yeah, trying to improve that a little bit, I think is really important. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about gender balance, but if you have questions about other kinds of online inequalities, then feel free to ask. I was saying to Ruth before this event properly began that the reason I came to be editing Wikipedia at all was actually during the course of my PhD, which was looking at the history of the Tavistock Institute, which some of you might have heard of before. My PhD was an interesting journey for all kinds of reasons. It didn't end up being on the topic I thought it would be. It didn't end up being on the time period I thought it would be. As a historian, those are two big jumps to be making from your initial proposal to submission. But I really enjoyed my research and wanted people to be able to know more about it. And, you know, I was the first person in my family to do A-levels, actually, let alone go to university. And I really wanted to be able to talk to them about my research. And one of the things that I found tricky was that there weren't really any summaries, any useful beginning points for people who hadn't heard about a lot of the topics, who hadn't heard about a lot of the key figures, who didn't know about some of the key work that I was looking at the history of. So I attended an event very similar to this one, although, you know, in person, back when that was a thing, as part of a conference, an academic conference, and learned how to edit Wikipedia. And that meant that I could share some of my knowledge with more people. So yeah, the TAVI kind of got me into this and into wiki editing in an interesting way. And when a job came up less than a year later at Wellcome to be their Wikimedian in residence, I applied for it because I thought that sounds quite different. That sounds quite interesting. Little suspecting that several years later I would still be there. So the first point I want to make is that if any of you are new to editing wiki, many of you I think might be. They usually are. Usually have a lot of beginners at these events, and you're very welcome. And it was less than a year from the first time I ever signed into Wikipedia and did anything at all to it, and then became employed as a Wikimedian in residence. So I would like you to take that as evidence that you can learn quite quickly. It's not that hard when you get going, because I'd like to think that Wellcome are fairly discerning employers who would have employed me if I was completely useless. Editing Wikipedia. I think most of us have used it before. Has that poll gone out to see if people are new editors or?
Amy, do you have a poll?
Yeah, it just says it's launching.
Okay.
So
Lovely. Well, we'll know at some point anyway. If you would like to, in the meantime, say hello to everyone in the chat. Feel free to introduce yourself. You can say whether you've done any editing before in the chat. You can say where you're from. Use that as a bit of a networking opportunity if you like. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Ever edited a Wikipedia page before? I'm going to say yes. Shockingly. So pretty much everyone, I think, these days has looked at a Wikipedia page and used it to find information. And that's kind of the power of Wikipedia. And that's why we're here today. Wikipedia gets, on average, 15 to 18 billion views every week, which is just an enormous, enormous number, a bit of a mind-boggling number. And this is the page on operations research that I'm showing you now. I'm sure all of you will be familiar with this view of a Wikipedia page. Okay, so yes is 13%, and that includes me, and no is 87%. So the vast majority of you are new editors. Can I ask if you're not a new editor? Oops. If you're not a new editor and if you have done this before, could you, if you wouldn't mind, let us know in the chat what you've edited before, or if if you're feeling like confident to crack on, or if you need a refresher, because then I will, if you'd like to just crack on, I'll give you a shortcut to the list of things to edit. And if you want a refresher, then obviously stay with us. There we go. Lovely. So let's see. Okay, lovely. So I've got mostly people wanting a bit of a refresher. I'm just going to hide this thumbnail view. So the operations research page, most people have seen this bit of Wikipedia, but there are lots and lots of other bits of Wikipedia that you might not have seen before. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through behind the scenes some of how Wikipedia works that you might not have seen before. Then I'm going to take you through how to edit a page to make improvements to it, which is quite straightforward. If any of you have ever sent an email before, or if any of you have ever used Microsoft Word before, which I'm sure you all have, then you will all be able to edit a Wikipedia page to make some improvements. I promise. And that part of today's session is going to take us up to 3 o'clock. And there'll be lots of opportunities, like I said, to please interrupt me and ask questions at any point, either in the chat or by unmuting yourself. And then we'll have an hour and a half where if you need to disappear, please do, I totally understand. If you're able to stick around and do some sort of chatting whilst you edit, that will be really nice. And I will be here for the duration to answer any questions that come up, because very often it's only when we start trying to do something that we realise the questions we have that might need answering. So I will be here to answer your questions. And then about half an hour before the end, so about 4:30, we will come back together, everyone who is able to talk a little bit about what we've seen during our editing, what we've been working on, if we're happy to share that, anything that was particularly shocking, you know, really in need of correction, anything that surprised you, anything that was surprisingly good, you know, just to generally chat about what we've done today and to hear a bit more about future events and to wrap up. So, so that's what today's session is going to look like. Any questions about that before we move on? Okay, I'm going to take that silence as a sign that we're okay to continue. Whilst I'm giving this tour of Wikipedia behind the scenes and showing you bits and pieces, I'm going to share 2 links with you. The first one is to create an account. You don't necessarily need to click on this link in the chat. What you can also do is on any Wikipedia page, you'll see right up the very top here, this is me logged in, I'm Zero Monk, very mysterious username, but there will be a button where you can create an account. So please create a Wikipedia account to start editing. There are 2 reasons for that. One is that it tells other Wikipedia editors, I'm here with good intentions to make Wikipedia better. So it kind of flags your edits as being probably from someone who has good intentions. It sort of encourages them to give you the benefit of the doubt if they have any questions, to ask you about what you were doing and to support you with your editing and give you information on how to do things. The other really useful thing that being logged in to edit Wikipedia does is a bit more selfish. So for one thing, if you edit when you're not logged in, it just shows your IP address. So if you don't want your IP address on show, better to create an anonymous account, which is in many ways more anonymous than editing with your IP address. The other thing that it does is it enables you to have this button, which is your contributions button, and it enables you to keep track of everything you've been doing, everything you've been editing, will all be listed. So it's a really useful way of, Christina Pargel's name. It's a really useful way of seeing everything that you've ever edited, everything that you've improved in a big long list. And that can be useful for various reasons. Sometimes you just forget someone's name and need to find it again. But also it's a measure of your impact. So one of the things that you can do is look at a page and when you've made changes to it, and I'll show you the tool, And it will tell you, there is a tool that will tell you how many people have looked at Wikipedia since that date that you edited that page. And usually it's really big numbers, and it's far bigger numbers than will ever read peer-reviewed journal articles that you publish. So if you're ever feeling a bit like you want to know that eyes are on your work and that you are making an impact, and that you're reaching lots of people and that they're benefiting from something that you've done, your contributions list can be a really lovely thing. It can also be a useful thing for demonstrating impact and for showing engagement with wider communities beyond academia. So you can use that, whether it's just for a bit of an ego boost or for something more formal, like, for instance, funding bids or evaluations. So that's something you may not have known about Wikipedia, but the contributions can be quite useful. And it's a really interesting thing to put on a CV that the people I know who've done it often get questions about, and it enables them to talk about how they communicate their research and some of the things that they're interested in, and to prove that they're able to write for a general audience and engage with people, all kinds of things. So it's quite a useful thing to, if you're happy to let people know your contributions. The other thing that it gives you access to is a watch list. So one of the questions I often get at these events are, once I've edited a page or created a page, you know, what happens to it? How do people look after Wikipedia pages? How does that work? And the way that that works is that people have watch lists. So when you're logged into Wikipedia, there's a little star button up here. I'm just going to make my, there we go, zoom in a little bit so it's not quite so small for you to. There's a star button, and this adds a page to your watch list. And any page on your watch list, you will get notified anytime anyone changes it. You will get that listed here, and you can choose to change your settings. So you even get an email if you like, although Wiki doesn't actually send you any emails unless you ask it to. So a really useful thing about logging into Wikipedia is that it actually enables you to watch over pages that you care about and see what people are changing about them. And it can be especially interesting to see what changes in relation to big news, new articles being published, those kinds of things. So a watch list is quite helpful. And that's how experienced editors keep an eye on Wikipedia pages and remove unhelpful things that might be done and improve helpful things that are done with good intentions but maybe need a bit of tidying up. So that's one of the ways that that happens. That's one of the ways that things are looked after, is that people will get a notification. So the other link that I'm sharing with you, oh, I don't want to, unfortunate. The other link that I'm sharing with you right now is a link to the dashboard that we're using today. Oh no, now my thing won't go away. Oh, it's there, never mind, sorry about that. So this link to this dashboard, tinyurl.com/ORSOCWiki, will take you to this dashboard. And when you're logged into Wikipedia, you'll be asked to sort of log in with Wikipedia and asked if you're happy to join this dashboard. And this dashboard is really, really useful to us because it enables us to keep track of all the editing that gets done as a result of this Wikithon, so that in a week we can report back to you and say, did you know this many pages were improved or created, this many citations were added, this is what we did. Yeah, and celebrate that, because it's a lovely thing to be able to see that tangible impact. And the really exciting thing about the dashboard is that from tomorrow, it will start counting for us how many people look at any of the articles that are improved today. So we will be able to see how many people anywhere in the world are benefiting from what we do today, which is a really lovely thing. And it will keep ticking. It will keep a track of that. So this time next year, we could look back and see how many people have benefited from this event that had 25 participants in April this year. And sometimes those numbers, I mean, actually, I say sometimes, every single event that I've run, those numbers are just inspirational. It's really, really incredible to see what an impact so few people can have just by putting things in a place that so many people use to access information, you know, whether they're students, journalists, policymakers, or just interested people trying to settle pub bets, sometimes those two. So this dashboard will be really, really useful for us to just see that. We're asking if we can log your edits for the next week so that you don't feel under lots of pressure to get everything finished this afternoon. And then after that, it will stop tracking any of your edits. So if you want to use your new Wikipedia skills to edit anything you like, whether that's your favorite K-pop band or your favorite breed of dog or somewhere you go on holiday or whatever it might be, we won't be logging that. So feel free to, after the event, please do use your wiki skills for anything that you like. I'll come back to the dashboard in a bit because this is where we've also put a list of articles. If you're not sure what you might like to improve and you just want to improve anything so that you can have a go at practicing your new skills, we've got a list. If you have something in mind that you'd like to edit today already, then that's great too. And I can hopefully support you to do that. But if you're just interested in the skills and not sure where to begin on the topics, then I can help with that too. So back to Wikipedia, and hopefully you'll all have a chance to create an account and log on to the dashboard whilst I'm talking about Wikipedia. Like I said, most people are familiar with a Wikipedia article. Pretty much everyone has seen one of these, and they're usually structured roughly the same. There's an introduction, which is maybe a couple of paragraphs, maybe just a sentence summarizing exactly what a topic is. When you're editing, especially when you're creating a brand new page, keep in mind that Wikipedia is more like a newspaper than a detective novel. We don't want to keep the good bits at the bottom with twists and turns. We want to put them right up the top in the headline, you know, as high as possible for people to be able to see at a glance and know whether they want to read on. This is especially important when it comes to creating pages for women and other underrepresented groups, because they usually get questioned more, as frustrating as that is. Women's expertise usually is subject to a little bit more scrutiny than men's, which is frustrating, but it's the case. So making sure that you say really clearly in the first sentence why this person is notable, why they should be included in an encyclopedia is very important. And just letting people know. And actually, I know that for some living academics who have Wikipedia pages, very often the first sentence or paragraph is the bit that everyone uses to introduce them when they give talks around the world. So useful to think if you just had a sentence to introduce someone at an event, what would you say about them? What would be important for people to know? And that's a good way of thinking about this first section of Wikipedia. And then often there's a short overview, key things, especially in subject pages, not so often in biographies, a bit of historical context often. And then usually it gets a bit more, you know, towards links to other pages. And this is the really important bit, the references. Wikipedia is a tertiary source. It's only as useful as the places it points people to read next. It's supposed to provide an introduction. I do a lot of events with school children, teaching them how to edit Wikipedia as well, and how to understand, how to have that information literacy and understand how things get to be on the internet, and what they can trust, and how to do some research to see whether they can trust things. And references are key. Usually their teachers have told them, don't trust Wikipedia, don't quote Wikipedia, don't cite Wikipedia. And many of us who've done any teaching, even at university level, will have encountered students who regurgitate bits of Wikipedia with a little bit too little critical thinking. So if you're seeing the same errors cropping up in student essays all the time. This is a nice place to ensure that they're at least getting accurate information. But also making sure that these references are good and pointing people towards things that you want them to make sure that they read, that will be useful to them to read more. And the references on a Wikipedia page are very interesting and very telling. They often are a great indicator of the quality of the page. The more references, usually the better, and also to what kind of place are these references leading people. If it's to peer-reviewed journal articles or books published by academic university presses, those are good signs. I'm sure you all know this as researchers. But actually it's something that people don't necessarily think of when they're thinking about creating biography pages. What are the sources of information that we can find about people? How can we make sure that they're finding useful information? So this is sort of, I like to think that you already know most of these things. Down at the very bottom of the page, we have some categories. Mine look a bit different because I can see some hidden categories because I've turned a button on. And I also have pluses and minuses to remove or add or adjust categories. But categories basically are the index to Wikipedia. So this is how pages can be linked up and how we know what topics they are on. And so some people's pages on our list today are not necessarily indexed so that people can find them in some lists. So I'll talk more about findability on Wikipedia. It's all very well things being on there. That's great, but we want to make sure they're findable as well. And I'm sure any of you who do research or work on networks, you know, this is obvious stuff to you. So Wikipedia pages, some useful things that you might not have noticed before about them. Down the left-hand side, there is a list of every other language that this page exists in. So if you are multilingual, feel free to explore different language Wikipedias. There are 270 different language versions of Wikipedia. And the pages will be different and different qualities in all of these pages. So some, this page will be very, very developed in, others it might be much, much shorter. So it's worth having a look. As you can see, this one, I think this is Arabic, is a lot shorter than the English version. So if you can translate things back and forward between wikis, that's a really great thing that you can do. And your username will log you in so that you can work on any language Wikipedia. So you don't have to have lots and lots of logins and remember lots of passwords, which is handy. In addition to different language of Wikipedia, there's also a what links here button, which I'll come back to when we look at biography. There is a view history button at the top. So coming back to that teacher question of, you don't know who added what and when. In a very literal sense, we do know who added what and when and where they got it from, because the history page tells you everything that's ever been done to a Wikipedia page, ever. Even the tiniest little fixed quotation tidy up through to much bigger edits. And you can look right back. If I click on oldest down here, we can look at what the page looked like when it was first created in 2002, and it looked like this. It's not a bad start, but it's considerably smaller than it is now. And it can be quite interesting from a research point of view, actually, to take a look at how information in the public domain changes over time and with big events, and how things are represented on Wiki. So I know there's some research looking at how Wikipedia pages change in response to various triggers. This history can also be browsed, so you can compare two revisions, which is interesting, and you can see highlighted in blue anything that's changed. So you can see who added what and when, and you can see big additions up the top and big removals of content down the bottom. And the view history page also has a link to a button. If you're feeling really like you want to play detective and find out more, you can even find an additional removal by typing in the text, a quote from the text that you want to find, who added this, and press start in this device called Wikiblame, and you can find out more, and you can find the Wikipedia user and say, excuse me, why did you do that? If you really feel inclined to. So everything on Wikipedia is actually logged and attributed to either a person or an IP address. And you can communicate with those people or IP addresses by leaving a message on their talk page. A talk page is where people discuss what should or shouldn't be on Wikipedia, and it tells you a little bit as well about who cares about a page. So this is the talk page for operations research. And you can see that there are projects, there are groups of Wikipedians who have particular interests who get together and take care of pages. They rank how important they are, how good they think they are. And you can take a look if you're interested and see what the quality scales and importance scales are and how it's been judged by these groups. And you can also join the groups. So if I were to click on Wiki Project Business, you can join this project and say, yep, I want to be part of your group. I want to edit articles on this topic. And you can help rate articles. You can help decide what should and shouldn't be there and discuss with other Wikimedians. This page is where people suggest what should be revised, what should be improved. You will see that some of these conversations are a bit more recent. So this is actually from 2020. This is from 2019. And then you can see how a page might have changed in response to things on a talk page, whether or not there's been any controversy. I always think reading the talk page for an article is very sensible. It's like when you walk into a meeting room where a meeting is already in place and people are already working on something. If you go to the talk page first, that's like sitting down and having a listen to what the people already in the meeting room are saying before you plunge in and offer your thoughts on the topic. It's just wise to get the lay of the land. And for those of you who are interested, if you go to the Tavistock Institute Wikipedia article and look at their talk page, it's really interesting. There are a lot of conspiracy theories. There's also a lot of quite heartwarming's the wrong word, quite confidence building, I suppose, in the structures of Wikipedia, responses from wiki editors to people saying, this should be included, this should be included. And they're saying, well, that's published from someone's basement on a vanity press. That's not a reliable source. We don't trust that source of information. We need to make sure that the sources for Wikipedia are really good and reliable. So we're not going to include that. So it's useful to look at a talk page to see what has been discussed for inclusion or not in the past before you start editing. And also just because it's quite interesting. You'll notice that some Wikipedia pages are much better than others, and some of them have these big banners that tell us about a particular problem that a page has. So operations research has been tagged with this banner that says the perspective in this article might not represent a worldwide view of the subject. So somebody is very upset that George Danzig has only got a passing mention. And a Wikipedia editor has tagged it to say, this should be fixed. If I were to tag this article, I would say that the history section mentions a lot of dead white men and not very many other people. There's also tags like dubious discuss here. So you can see it has kind of been, thanks Kathy, it has been tagged up with some issues that can be improved, but there are also other issues that haven't been tagged. There's huge amounts on the Second World War on particular projects, Blackett's work, And then it's really sparse in other sections. After World War II, it's like less than a third of the size of the World War II stuff, and quite specific about a few things that happened in Britain, but not elsewhere. And the names mentioned are a particular thing that I take issue with, and I think Warren should take issue with, because if we scroll down beyond journals and other journals, we've got see also. And I'd like you to just take a look at this list of names. It's a bit of a weird list. It's also missing any women. Apparently, after reading about operations research, there is not a single woman whose work you might also want to follow on and read about. Now, what I really strongly don't suggest you do is just edit this and add a massive list of women's names into this section. But if anyone does fancy something a bit meaty that they can make some real improvements on, thinking about who is mentioned in this page, who's mentioned in the history, and not just in terms of men versus women, but also, you know, as this front top banner suggests, it doesn't represent a worldwide view of the subject. Somebody's quite upset because the US perspective is completely neglected. They also could have said any perspective other than the UK is completely, the UK during World War II is, you know, kind of completely lacking. And a very small in terms of edit size, but big in terms of impact size thing that you can do is to take a look at this list of references. These are the things that people are going to click on to learn more. How many women researchers' work are mentioned in the references? How many women are cited? You might have heard of an initiative called Cite Her Work. That applies to academic papers, but I always say it definitely applies to Wikipedia as well. Wikipedia is a huge source of traffic for people to find their way to reading more, to reading in more depth. And at the moment, not very many of them are going from this page to read the work of a diverse range of researchers. So if you can think of people whose research should be mentioned, not just in this page, in some other pages as well, a really powerful thing that you can do is to make sure that people's work is cited in the right page. Not everyone needs a Wikipedia article biography about them, but I would argue that most people who are publishing interesting things, some of their work will be relevant to some Wikipedia article somewhere, in all likelihood. And how can that be tied in? How can that be mentioned? How can you use wiki editing as a way to amplify voices and support other scholars in your field? It's a really, really nice thing that you can do. If you hear a fascinating conference talk, if you're at a conference, citing it in the relevant Wikipedia page means that you can find it again. It's a really, really nice thing. If you're prone to losing notepads, it's an incredible way of making sure you can always find that researcher who did that really interesting thing on X topic again, because they will be cited in the Wikipedia article. It means your students can find it. It means if a news story crops up or a journalist is interested in finding people to speak on a particular topic, they will look down at that list of references at people who are clearly, you know, clearly well placed to speak on a topic. And they will see a list of names of people who they should potentially speak to, who they can contact. So Wikipedia is really a starting point, not just for people learning about a topic, but also for people learning who they should pay attention to on a topic. My work on the history of the Tavistock Institute, I did a lot of editing on civil resettlement units, a programme that was created to rehabilitate returning prisoners of war during the Second World War. And much to my grandma's absolute delight and pride, because some of my work was cited, and I didn't just cite myself, I cited lots of other people, but because some of my work was cited, I got contacted by the researchers from the show Who Do You Think You Are? And I got to go on there and talk to someone from EastEnders, and it's basically like the best thing that I will ever do in my grandma's opinion. So it's a really nice way, like, you know, that's evidence. That's not why I edited that page. I edited that page because I wanted people to be able to find out about a topic that I thought was very interesting. And that just happened to be a lovely, lovely thing that happened as a result. So nice things that you can do just to add citations to a Wikipedia page is an incredibly powerful change that you can make. I mentioned this index down the bottom, operations research. Everything in the category operations research, we can find everything that's been categorized as relevant to this topic by clicking on that. Thanks, thank you, another person has to go, thanks for attending. So you can see lots of other topics that you might want to edit, lots of other topics that you might want to have a look and see whose work's mentioned, who's cited, how good is this page, how many men researchers versus women researchers does this mention, is anyone missing who should be here, you know, what can I improve about this topic? So that's one thing to consider when you're thinking about what can I improve, where shall I begin, what shall I do? Another thing, operations researchers. So this is the list of people that Wikipedia editors have categorized as working in this field. Really fascinatingly for me, I think this is the first time I've ever been doing one of these events, and hats off, well done to operations research fans. There are more women listed in this section than men. There are 26, I think I counted, out of 39 of these pages are biographies of women, which is remarkable and amazing. And it's so nice to see, and it's a shame that this is such a novelty for me. But what's always worth looking at is not just how many biographies, but how good are they? How well have they been ranked? And also, I mentioned a button earlier, so I'm sorry, I'm going to pick Karen Ardle because she is the first person on this page. So she has a biography, so it's, you know, short but good. It's got some useful references here for people to find out. What links here, this tool over here on the left-hand side, essentially tells you how easily people will be able to find this page. So I'm going to change this to just say article so that it's just telling me what articles are pointing towards this, because we don't want to know about talk pages and things. So there are 17 other Wikipedia pages that point towards this one that could help people to find this page. So one of the really useful things that you can do to edit and improve Wikipedia is to not just make sure that biographies are there, but make sure that other pages mention them. And a lot of the sessions that I run, a really interesting thing that people find is that men's pages, men are mentioned in women's pages, whether that's as their advisors, doctoral advisors, or, you know, some sort of supporter in their career, or a boss or a mentor or a relative. And the same doesn't apply the other way around. Women are not mentioned in men's pages anywhere near as much as men are mentioned in women's pages. So it's worth thinking about people's networks and how those are represented on Wiki, and how you can make sure that women are mentioned in all the places that they should be, whether that's pages about their work or pages about their alma mater or their current research institution or any of these kinds of things. Prize winners, you might be aware of this. Wiki loves a prize. I'll talk more about Notability in a minute. It might genuinely be the case, but of the people who are listed on this page, I think only one woman has ever won this prize. And that's very common, and worth keeping in mind that the way that encyclopedias, like Wikipedia, gauge someone's notability is very often the prizes they've won, the named chairs they've been awarded. So I often see that people have suggested that somebody should be on Wikipedia because they're really important and their work's really interesting, but there aren't very many sources written about them. Nobody's talking about them. Nobody's written the biographies. Nobody's done a personal profile in a scholarly magazine or a local paper or anywhere really. There's no profiles, there's only their CV that they've written themselves, which is obviously not a trustworthy source. And their notability is questionable because within the community, people might know that their work is amazing and that they're really important, but they haven't been nominated for prizes. They haven't had the acclaim. They haven't had the journalistic coverage that others might. So if someone isn't on Wikipedia and you can't find the sources to get them onto Wikipedia, it's always worth thinking about, what can I do about that? Can I nominate someone for, especially an issue for non-academic practitioners? So I've been given an amazing list of inspirational women researchers, but a load of them we're probably not going to be able to create Wikipedia pages for because people just haven't written enough about them. They haven't been nominated enough for prizes. We need to raise their profile elsewhere before we can get them onto Wikipedia. So please keep that in mind going forward from today, because nominating someone for something or telling someone who, is looking for something to include in a scholarly magazine or, a publication, it's a nice thing to say, oh, have you thought about doing a spotlight on so-and-so, or a page with about somebody's career or research. It's a really powerful act of allyship, not just for the women that you know, but for other underrepresented folks as well. And speaking of other underrepresented folks, operations researchers by nationality, people who are grouped by nationality, as much as that person was complaining about the operations research page being mostly British and not American enough, when it comes to actual operations researchers and biographies, 95 biographies of American operations researchers, 19 of Brits. We're doing okay there. But look at what this says about the world and who's doing research and who is worth listening to and who is worth knowing about. Look at how few countries are represented here compared with how diverse your conferences might be. And one thing that I'm sure we've all encountered is people saying, oh, I just didn't know who to invite to be on that panel. Oh, I just, and they're using that lame excuse when they could have done a little bit of legwork. But let's take away some of those excuses. Let's make sure that people have no excuses for not having really diverse panels by making sure that we think about, who needs a biography, whose work should be cited, how easy to find are the people that I work with, that I work in a community with. So I just want you to keep these questions in the back of your mind about what's missing from Wikipedia, what's in Wikipedia, what could be better, so that when you go off to do some editing, you've got some ideas about what you could include. And I just wanted to share with you, at the bottom of this Wikipedia page on operations research, it links out to Wikimedia Commons, which is the home of pictures, sounds, and videos. And so this is what you can find in Wiki Commons. Your login also gets you into Wiki Commons. And it's worth thinking about sharing diagrams here if you don't mind them being open access to enable people to use them in learning. Anything that's put on Wiki Commons you've got to be happy for it to be used by anyone for any reason. One of the interesting things is where there are pages, I don't think there is for this one, on operations. Oh, there we go. I'm wrong. Operations researchers. So if you look at these names and if you look at these pictures, what do you see about operations research? What do you see about who is an operations research, an operations researcher? Who is one? This is telling a story as well. The pictures speak as well as the words. So think about maybe at conferences asking women if they mind having a nice picture taken, which they can obviously approve, that you can then upload to Commons, so that when people look at operations researchers, they will see a slightly different thing. And it's worth knowing that one of the reasons why Wikipedia has such enormous influence is because it comes so high up Google search results. And that includes the images on Wiki Commons because they're free for reuse. So when people type things into Google, what results do you want them to find in terms of words and pictures? If you get someone type in operations researchers into Google, let's see. Oh, okay. Operations researchers. What are we seeing? This one, actually, there is a woman in this picture with lots of men pointing at things for her. Great. But yes, whose pictures are we seeing? What are we seeing here? And what topics are coming up? You can see here the very first result is this Wikipedia page. In my opinion, this Wikipedia page is pants. No offense, but you know, it could be so much better. It could be mentioning so many more interesting people and signposting folks on to so many more interesting things than it currently is. And it's just a bit of a lost opportunity, really, isn't it? So thanks for coming on. So this is the state of Wikipedia. How do we edit it? I've not left very much time for the editing part, and I'm sorry about that, but it's very, very straightforward. There is a big edit button up the top of Wikipedia. And when you're signed in, I recommend signing in first, as I said. You can click the edit button. You can click the edit button if you're not signed in. But as I said, it will log your IP address. I've got two edit buttons. I've got a source one and just a plain edit button. And that's because I do lots and lots of wiki editing. So I've set it up so that I get to see both. You might have seen this way of editing Wikipedia before. This is the source editor. This is how all of Wikipedia used to be edited and built. It's very similar to HTML markup. So anyone who's familiar with that will be quite comfortable with this, I would expect. Personally, gives me a bit of a headache to look at things laid out this way. And when I first started editing Wikipedia as someone from a humanities background, I spent a lot of time searching my keyboard for bits of punctuation like squiggly brackets and pointy brackets that I never really used. So you are absolutely welcome to edit Wikipedia using the source editor if you're comfortable this way. There are various formatting tools that you can see for the key things that you might want to use. And there's a citation tool where you can just click where you want to add your citation and add a template and paste that in. And then scroll down. You can type in an edit summary to say what you've changed and hit publish changes. And feel free to edit this way if you like. Personally, I don't like this way of editing at all. And I think it's not very beginner friendly, which is why we now have an amazing thing called the visual editor. So if you ever end up looking at an editing page that looks like this and you want to find something a bit more friendly, there's a magic pencil button up in the top right here, and you can switch to visual editing. Now, if we click on the visual editor, this page looks pretty much exactly the same as the page when people are just reading it. It's a WYSIWYG editor, a what you see is what you get editor. So when you change things here, you'll be able to see it change immediately, and you'll be able to essentially see how the page will look when you've finished editing, which is really useful so that you know that you've done things right. For instance, if you're trying to link to something, you'll be able to see if it goes blue and that it links to the page, or if it goes red, which means it's not linking anywhere because a page doesn't exist. And maybe it should, and somebody needs to create that page, or maybe you typed something wrong and it needs to just have a little bit of a change. So editing Wikipedia this way, as I promised you, is as easy as editing a Microsoft Word document or writing an email. All you need to do is click your cursor where you want to make your change and start typing. So this is where I am adding information. I'm obviously not going to keep this sentence because this is deeply unhelpful. You'll be adding things that are genuinely useful to pages. When you've added your piece of information, and it can just be a sentence, that's absolutely fine. Sometimes the best edits are just a nice, quick summary of one thing that somebody needs to know from a piece of research. Click the Cite button. And the lovely thing about Wikipedia is that the folks who work at Zotero, the citation management software, created a citation tool for Wikipedia as well. And it works in a very similar way. So there's an automatic tab because Wikipedians are lazy, this is great, and I wish it had existed when I was doing my PhD. You can just paste things in, a URL to a website. DOI is better, a digital object identifier for a journal article, an ISBN number for a book, a PubMed ID, if any of you work in medical fields. PubMed ID is another version of a digital object identifier, really. Or a citation, so you can take a citation from somewhere else, pop it in here and press the generate button. And Wikipedia will format it into the correct way and auto number it and make sure that it appears down at the bottom in the references section. If for any reason it doesn't manage to generate it, and that's often for things like the newsletters or magazines of scholarly societies that tend to be less well indexed behind the scenes online, you can click on the manual tab and you can click on the type of thing that you're trying to add, whether that's a book or a journal or a newspaper article. Local newspaper articles don't always generate very well either, so this is useful for that. And you just click on the type of thing that it is and fill in the blanks. And obviously add as much info as you can so that people can find their way to your citation, so that it will be as useful as possible to them. And then once you've done a citation once, it will be in this big list of reusable citations, and you can just type in a keyword to narrow it down to find your citation more easily, to reuse it the next time you need to use it in a Wikipedia, in the Wikipedia article that you're editing. So adding a citation is really easy. Adding a sentence is really easy. Basic edits on Wikipedia are really, really straightforward. The key thing, actually, and the thing that a lot of people don't realise, is how to get Wikipedia edits to stick. So this big blue publish changes button, once we've added our thing, I would really encourage you to press the publish changes button every time you add a sentence and a citation, because we all know how unreliable computers can be. And I'm sure all of us have had one of those terrible moments where we might have potentially lost a little bit of work because the battery has died or Wi-Fi has dropped out or something frustrating has happened. The cat's knocked a cup of tea over your keyboard. Any of these things can happen to us. So it's useful to save often and consider the publish changes button your save button. So save your changes. And whenever I hear from anyone who's had any trouble getting Wikipedia edits to stick in the past, it's usually because they haven't filled in the edit summary. So tell people why you're adding what you're adding. Tell people why you're removing what you're removing. That one's especially important. If you're taking away something that's no longer relevant, that's unhelpful or outdated, really important to say why, because otherwise it just looks like you're trying to remove information and make it no longer available to people. Which doesn't seem very generous. So really important to say why you're changing what you're changing. There are two buttons here. You don't have to fill in any detail because obviously you will have done the change. So just added info into history section would be fine, or added info on early life, or added info on career. You know, just give people information. If you're taking something out, it's useful to say replacing information that's no longer currently accepted in the discipline, or that kind of, you know, just give a very brief explanation of why you're doing what you're doing. And then underneath you'll see this is a minor edit and watch this page. So I mentioned watch lists. This is the easiest way to add something to your watch list, is to just tick this button and then you'll see any changes that anyone does to a page after you've done your change to it. This is a minor edit. You can click on minor edit and read what a minor edit is. In my experience, lots of new editors who are women hover over the minor edit button and want to play down the changes that they are making. They lack a bit of confidence and they don't want to make waves and they don't want to make a big deal. And oh, I'm just adding a sentence. I think that's pretty minor. I'm going to click minor. please don't downplay what you're adding. If you are adding even a sentence in a citation, you are making the internet better. You are making information more accessible to people. That's not a minor thing. That's a great thing. If that's all you do today or this week, that's still a great thing that has made the internet better. Minor edits are really just for copy editing. Therefore, you know, correcting typos, a bit of a tidy up really. And that's still really useful editing. If you are a pedant, my mum has passed that tendency on to me, and you know, making sure that full stops are the right side of citations is something I probably spend a little bit too much time on Wikipedia. That's absolutely great. That is a minor edit because you're tidying up rather than adding something new or correcting something or enabling people to sort of get something they couldn't before. You're just enabling them to get it in a bit of a better form. So keep away from the minor edit button. Be proud of what you're adding. Even a sentence is a great thing. When you're editing Wikipedia, the second thing that is most likely to have your edits undone is if they appear to be the result of a conflict of interest. If you are not being very encyclopedic on an encyclopedia, you might get a little bit told off by Wikipedians. So it's worth thinking, can I be encyclopedic about this topic? Can I be unbiased in the way that I talk about it? So strongly encourage you not to edit pages that are about yourself, because let's be honest, none of us want to say terrible things about ourselves. Someone you love, someone you hate, also pretty hard to remain neutral and encyclopedic. You know, someone you're related to, your boss, because presumably you're not going to be editing their pages to say anything very, very negative, or maybe you are, but that's also problematic. Or your employer in a broader sense. So as someone who's employed by Wellcome Trust, I wouldn't edit the Wellcome Trust page. That wouldn't be appropriate. So worth thinking, what pages do I have a conflict of interest about? You don't have a conflict of interest on your research topic, on peers you might have, you know, knowledge of from conferences, you might have read their work. But think about what's encyclopedic. So if you think, okay, I don't have a conflict of interest, but I think this person is absolutely incredible. I've never met them, but I think their work is just world-changing. That's great, but don't write that into Wikipedia unless you have it as a direct quote from a trusted source. So if anything sounds too much like an advert, Wikipedians will remove it. If anything sounds too much, too promotional rather than encyclopedic, it will get removed, and there will probably be a label that will be put on the Wikipedia page saying don't trust this, it sounds like advertising. That's why new pages often get deleted even and don't appear on the encyclopedia, because people think that they're trying, you know, that they're adverts rather than genuine, useful knowledge contributions. So think about the tone, and the easiest sort of way of doing this that I can suggest is that you don't use any adjectives. Don't use any adjectives. Nothing is great or interesting or exceptional unless it's a direct quote from somebody that you're citing. Instead, let the actions speak for the person or the topic or the place. Talk about what someone's done and let a reader come to their own conclusions about how great that is, rather than you telling them that something is great or terrible. So just stick clear of adjectives, and that will really help you to stay on the right side of Wikipedia's views on what's encyclopedic. So one final thing on what is encyclopedic, and this is related to new pages. So the suggestions that we've got of pages for you to edit today are mostly pages that already exist that need improving. You can create a new page if you would like to. A really great place to do that, when you're logged in, you have a thing called a sandbox. And a sandbox is essentially a blank Wikipedia page that you can create and edit and put anything in there that you want and draft it. And like a real literal sandbox, you can build things up and change the shape of them and add bits on and take bits away until you like the look of it. and then you can turn it into a real page. So your Sandbox is a perfect place for creating a draft of a new page that I can then, if you just drop me a message, help you turn into a live Wikipedia page. It is always worth thinking before you do loads and loads of work to create your page, should this be on Wikipedia? I think my cat is great. My neighbours probably don't, but I think my cat is great. But there aren't enough sources to demonstrate that other people think my cat is great and worthy of being in an encyclopedia. And unfortunately, this is the problem of not just women, but particularly women who work in outside of academia, in business and industry, is that they are not written about very much. There are not very many sources talking about them, about their work. And actually, you might have seen that there was a big outcry because one of the recent Nobel Prize winners for science, she had a Wikipedia page rejected because it didn't have enough sources writing about her and her work. All of the sources were of her work, her articles, rather than people saying how important they were, how important her work was. So the page was deleted, and it was only when she was awarded the Nobel Prize that Wikipedians scrambled to fix that and to create the page and to find the sources. New page reviewers should really help you to find those sources, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes reviewers of Wikipedia, just like reviewers of journals, don't necessarily take the time to give as constructive feedback as we would like. They just say no. So make that as easy as possible for yourself and really think about how many sources can I find? Are there enough sources to prove that this person or topic is interesting? And I would say it's probably not worth trying to create a new page with fewer than 5 sources that are independent. So about rather than by the person or topic that it's about. So sometimes even 5 doesn't sound like a very high number, but sometimes it can be really hard to even find 5. And that's at the point when I would say, think about what you can nominate them for, think about who you can insist writes a profile on them, think about what else you can do to get them visible enough to have a Wikipedia page, which then amplifies that visibility, and then it becomes a virtuous circle and could be a really positive thing. If you would like to know more about creating a new page and who should have a new page, there's this thing called Wikipedia, there's a rule called notability. Is something notable enough? Is something important enough to be on Wikipedia? And there are the general notability guidelines, so there should be significant coverage. And like I said, significant, I would say at least 5 things talking about a topic from reliable sources, trustworthy places, independent of the subject. So something that's written by someone, like their LinkedIn page, absolutely not trustworthy. It's not significant, it's not reliable, and it's not a trustworthy source. Something by someone's employer is probably also a little bit questionable. I would say if you've got to 4, then you can maybe use that as your 5th, but try and get 4 independent ones first. Thanks so much for everyone. So the general notability guidelines are the thing that make it really frustrating sometimes to improve the coverage of women or other underrepresented people, because the reason they're underrepresented on Wiki is usually because they're also underrepresented more broadly in the world. And there are notability criteria. If you're ever interested, you can just type in Wikipedia notability and you'll find the notability criteria. There are notability criteria for people and academics. This is shorthand called the prof test. Is someone sufficiently professorial to get on Wikipedia, which, as you can tell just by the fact it's called the prof test, is very biased against people in business and industry. So we have to work harder to raise their profile. And you can see these 8 criteria. Somebody only needs to satisfy one of these criteria, And whichever one it is, I would very strongly encourage you, if you're creating a new page or if you're improving a page, to make sure that whichever one of these they meet is mentioned in that first sentence or first paragraph about them, because it sends a signal to Wikipedia editors. This is why this person's really important and should be on this encyclopedia, because they have had their research used by all of these other people and it's influenced all of these things, because they've received this award, because they have been made a fellow of this society, because they're a really important teacher in this field, named chair of wherever. They have a very important elected post, important impact generally in the news, etc. Or they're the chief editor of a journal. And as you can imagine, all of these things are areas where women tend to be a bit underrepresented. So in some ways, the criteria make it harder to make Wiki more balanced in favour of women. But the balance is shifting. Women are becoming more and more represented. And I think also these criteria are set by editors, and the more editors of Wikipedia who are women or from different backgrounds, the more we can suggest they're not appropriate, they might need to be changed. And the more we can also keep them in the back of our minds in terms of our work in the real world and what we should be nominating people for, what we can do to raise people's profiles. So, sorry, I've overrun on my tutorial a bit, but I would like to invite you to ask any questions that you have now about editing. Really, editing a page is very, very simple. You just need to click edit or go to your Sandbox if you want to create a new draft. If you're not sure what you would want to practice your editing on today, that is where this dashboard is really, really useful. We have got a list of suggested articles. If you click on the articles tab, you can then click available articles, and there is a big long list of women whose pages are there. You can see these letters on the left-hand side. They say how good Wikipedians have ranked the page as being. So some will need more work than others, and most of these need some improving. So you can choose yourself an article to edit from here. If you want to have a quick look at it, you can click on the button and you can start making improvements. You can add some citations. It's not just about biography pages though. As I mentioned, somebody might want to overhaul the operations research page. You might want to choose a subfield of operations research and take a look at that. Think about who's mentioned. Any editing that you do to share a bit more info, it will be wonderful. So I'm going to invite you now to ask me any questions that you have about editing. Oh yes, the tiny URL link is the one that will take you to this dashboard. I'm going to pop it back in so that it's down at the bottom and you don't have to rummage for it. There we go. So that's how you can access this dashboard and go to this articles tab and find things that you can edit on. There's also a Google Docs sheet that has a list of names for expansion. And if anyone's feeling ambitious, it's also got a list of pages for creation. They might be hard to find your 5 sources on. So it might be a bit of an ambitious thing. It might be that you look at those names and think it's outrageous that I can't find 5 sources to create this page. In which case, please feel free to do some lobbying for them to get greater recognition in any way that you can think of. So there are 2 places in the chat there that you can find names of people to edit pages. And I'm going to stop talking now and invite you to ask me any questions at all about editing. And what I'm going to do is put on in the background, in case nobody fancies talking, this thing called HatNote. HatNote is the way that you can listen to people editing Wikipedia. Every time one of these bubbles appears, that's someone making a change to a Wikipedia page. And you will see, as they are pinging away in the background, list of American game shows, the Nanny Diaries, capital punishment in Singapore, that's an interesting one, President of the Canadian Space Agency, Sundar Leopard Cat, all kinds of topics are mentioned here. Nomadland's probably going to get a lot of editing. And I just want you to, if you're ever feeling a bit unsure, just take a look at all this stuff that people are editing on and think about all the things that they're not editing on that you could be contributing to, and all of the straight white men who are like, the world needs to know my knowledge, and just have a tiny bit of their confidence to share the stuff that you know and the things that you know to be important so that people can access them as well. So yeah, I'm going to continue to be here for the rest of this session. Feel free to ask me any questions at any point. And if you have no questions and you just want to crack on and do some editing and play around and click all the buttons, please do. And if any questions occur to you whilst you're doing that, then just pop them in the chat or
should we unmute for the
Please feel free to unmute yourselves, have a bit of a chat, talk about any pages that you know of. It might be that you came to this session with some pages that you thought, oh, this has been driving me mad for ages and I just want to get it fixed. Then I'd love to hear about those. They're always quite interesting.
So I would guess there's an awful lot of names that not many of us know in the
Yeah, there probably are in this list. Like I said, I strongly suspect that this is very American dominated.
Yeah.
So it could be worth having a search to find people who you think should be on Wikipedia and see if they have pages to be improved. And feel free to improve any page that you would like to that's already there, or ask me any questions.
Well, I can see that we're down to only about 12 of us.
Yeah, I think a lot of people had to leave after the initial.
That's right, and that's what we were expecting, I think, because most people can't spend the entire afternoon. But is it worth the people who are still here just saying what they're going to do next, so we don't all
that would be lovely.
head for the same thing?
So Sonya here. I think I am going to go back to the page, the only other page that I've created, and add some categories and things like that and just improve it because it was quite basic. So which was Sally Brailsford's Wikipedia entry. So I think we're going to do that first and then look at some other things.
If you want to add categories to a page, that's a really great thing that I should have mentioned. Thank you for that. My screen's just frozen. So to add categories to a page to make sure that it's indexed and useful to, not that it's not useful, sorry, that it's indexed and findable a little bit more easily. There are these 3 lines just to the left of this pencil.
Okay.
And my thing is loading a bit slowly. There we go. Aha, it's back. Okay. I don't want it to recover my changes really, but you can see if you click on those 3 lines, there's categories is the second button down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you can just start typing and it will help you to add categories as you start typing then. On Wikipedia, the category is operations research because it was created by an American rather than operational research, just in case you need to be able to find that.
Great, thanks.
So, okay, Beth does Elsa. Oh, that's fantastic.
Fantastic.
Does Danish.
A bit of translation.
Great.
Yeah, you mentioned editing Wikipedia pages so that your family might know more about what you're doing. And my family is from Denmark, and I think maybe editing the Danish version would help my grandmother understand more what I do.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
I think that's a great motivator to do that. And, you know, often when we're introduced by people who are not in our discipline, I had the real interesting privilege of doing an event recently with Cambridge College, and the dean, I think she was the dean of the college, had formerly been an ambassador And she said that she used to meet lots of interesting people at dinners. And very often, as she was being driven to the dinner or the function or whatever it was, she would look up the person initially. But then if she wasn't sure what their work involved, she would search for what their work was. And obviously, very often click on the Wikipedia explanation for their field as a way of knowing what questions she might ask them, or, you know, just giving her a bit of an in. And if the page is rubbish or doesn't talk about your subset of a discipline or doesn't really make coherent sense in what it says about it, then that's a real barrier to people being able to have interesting conversations with you about your work. So that's a really great thing to do. Really, really nice idea.
My grandmother still seems to think that I do financial mathematics, which I do not. You know, she got the math part of that correct. So.
Right.
Yeah, and as you're editing, like I said, just think about maybe whose work you're citing. That's a nice, you know, nice thing to have in mind when improving a page that's really sparse. Is okay. The downside is there's not very much here, but the upside is that means I get to shape what's here and think about, you know, the balance of these citations on this page.
Can I say, while I'm here, if anybody wants to, there's a page on me. I don't know who added that page on me, but if anybody wants to have a look at it and ask me anything, I can tell them. While I'm available, I'm very, very happy to do that. I don't know if that's allowed, if that counts as conflict of interest.
No, it's definitely allowed. I would say they'll probably need sources to sort of add to things, but it's a really useful thing actually to fact check a page. Someone saying, oh, I've noticed there's a page on you and it doesn't seem to talk about this part of your work, or do you know if it's correct? Is there anything that I could improve? Someone I taught how to edit on Wikipedia is an amazing researcher called Dr. Jess Wade, who ended up being recognised in the Queen's Honours for her work in diversity, for all of the editing that she'd done to create pages about researchers and their work and their contributions. But she said it's incredible, you know, opportunity to, when she meets someone, say, oh, I noticed that this is missing, or I've read a lot about your work in the course of improving your page, and it's been really useful actually for her career to look at that. So the other nice thing about asking people in person is I don't think your page has a picture of you, and if you had a nice picture of yourself that you wanted to upload to Wikimedia Commons that you had taken, then somebody could add that to the page, and that would be nice.
I think, thinking about it, I think it might be easier to take this whole thing offline on another occasion, because when you just sort of flagged up my page, it's totally out of date. I haven't worked at the LSE for some years, so.
Yeah, it's quite possible these things need updating. Every now and again, I'll get someone drop me an email because I'm listed as a Wikimedian saying, help, how do I fix this? It needs some TLC.
Well, Ruth, I'm happy to do some updates if you want to send me some info that you want.
Thanks a lot, Sonia. I'll let you have some stuff. So what about the others? Evelyn, Ewan, Alexandra and Rachel. Are you going to have a go? Or are you still there?
Sorry, no, I am here. I tried creating an account on Wikipedia, but it's saying that I'm unable to edit Wikipedia due to a block affecting my IP address.
Okay, no problem. We can get that fixed for you. So was that when you were trying to create an account, or when you were trying to start doing your first edits once you were logged in?
That was when I was creating my account.
Right, okay. I thought so. So what you should be able to do is, if you go to the dashboard, you should be able to request an account.
Okay.
So have a try of doing it that way. And then I can approve your request and we can sort of create it through a different route, basically.
Okay, cool, thank you.
No problem at all. So what happens very often, just for explanation, is that if there have been edits to Wikipedia from an IP address and This could be that somebody else formerly had your IP address. I'm absolutely not, not suggesting this is you, but it happens all the time at Wellcome because we have library Wi-Fi, so lots of people can use our Wi-Fi. It happens very often at universities because you have lots of students logged onto the Wi-Fi. Somebody might have done some edits from an IP address that were not terribly helpful. And so Wikipedia might have blocked that IP address to prevent that from happening. But it usually means that as long as you can get an account set up, which we can do through a couple of other routes if the dashboard route doesn't work, so just let me know. Once you're logged in, that usually gets you around that problem, so that'll be fine.
Oh yeah, I'll give that a go now. Thank you.
Brilliant.
I had the same thing happening on my work computer, but then I've just swapped to my personal laptop and it's working. So I don't know if that could be an issue too.
Oh yeah, if you're using a work computer that has a VPN to your university or to your employer, then it will be reading your IP address as, you know, that organization rather than your home personal one. So that could be a reason for that happening.
What about you, Evelyn?
I've come more to kind of have a listen and see what I can learn with my OR and education hat on. I think obviously diversity is important to the whole OR society as well as WORAN, and especially because when I'm talking to like young girls who are interested in this, I want to be able to tell them about women in OR, and I've noticed myself that there weren't enough women in OR on Wikipedia. So it was just to sort of come and learn more and yeah, just see what I can learn from this and apply to.
You're not going to put OR in education up there then?
Don't know if we're notable enough.
It's a really interesting thing that I come across often when I'm talking about STEM. You know, is that a lot of really, really interesting disciplines that offer fantastic careers that, you know, young women and girls could do so well in. They look like they have only ever been done by people who don't look like those people, those young people. And that's such a shame. So I think, you know, addressing some of those issues so that if, for instance, somebody does one of those questionnaires that they still do in schools that suggest, oh, you could be a ... you know, you could be in operations research. And they go, oh, what's that? And go and look it up. They're not like, no. You know, that it represents what that field is like today and do it. That's such an important thing, I think, to encourage people. My partner works in aviation, and that's an industry where they have been doing a lot of work but still have a long way to go in making it appealing to more people to get into.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, it's interesting just thinking about different attitudes and approaches to it as well, because I think I've always been quite stubborn, and if it was ever suggested that something wasn't for girls, I'd be like, well, I don't care, but obviously not everyone thinks like that. And yeah,
I think actually sometimes flagging it, so sometimes I do this sort of session with young people, with teens, particularly those who are sort of you know, 16 plus, starting to think about what do I want to do? Everyone keeps asking me this question, what am I going to do with my life? Sometimes flagging it to them, saying there are all of these incredible people doing things in this area, but they are not acknowledged in the way that they should be. You know, how outrageous is that? Like, look at this big list of men and think about all these amazing women who are missing. It does help rile them up, not just to do wiki editing and add people who they feel should be there, but also to think more broadly that this is the case for so many things, and it doesn't mean that people aren't there, and it doesn't mean that I can't do it. I just might, you know, and I think sometimes for people who, like yourself, have the confidence to sort of kick back against some of that, it spurs them on more even to say, I'm going to fix that. I'm going to be one of the people who makes it better.
I'm just wondering for myself, are you going to do any, Amy?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute then.
Sorry.
I'm not sure if I have enough knowledge about a particular subject. I think
That's a really interesting thing. So what I would encourage you to do is have a look at some of the names on the list. Just click on some names and see if any of them have these ugly banners at the top saying, oh, it's missing stuff about this, or it's really, you know, biased about this, or so on the operations research page, you'll notice that there are some questions like dubious, or by who, or original research, or citation needed, and sometimes the tags on Wikipedia pages help steer you to things that you can fix by saying this is a bit rubbish, and then you kind of know what to search for to fill in the blanks. Another really nice simple thing that you can do, I'm just going to share my screen. Lots of Wikipedia pages, make this a bit smaller. Lots of Wikipedia pages about people, not just about people, but particularly the ones about people, will be missing. So I think this one was one of them actually. Yeah, it will be missing an info box. So you might notice that lots of Wikipedia articles, I'll show you one. I'm going to show you a horribly, actually no, okay, let's see. Let's see if this one has one. Okay, so this one says it needs some citations. So that's a banner, an example of a banner that you can add some to. And now I'm going to show you a ridiculously overdeveloped page. So an info box is this thing on the right hand side that has like the key info in it. And that you can do just pulling information from a page without having to know anything new about a person that's not mentioned already in their page. You're just putting it into a form that's really easy for people to find.
that's quite cool.
So all you need to do is click insert and then template.
Where's
and then
it,
type info box person.
Where's it? Sorry, where was insert?
Sorry, I went a bit speedy there. Insert's at the top here with this down arrow. And then you can click template.
Oh, that's because I'm not editing.
Well, yeah. So if you hit the edit button, and then insert on my screen is almost right underneath edit, but it depends on your screen. And then template, and info box is all one word, and then person. And then what it pops up with is just a fill in the blank, and all it has initially is name, but there are loads and loads and loads of fields. So you can just go through. Some of these will be relevant, some of them won't. So for instance, there's disappeared date and place, which is probably not relevant for the vast majority of people, you would hope, unless it's a really unfortunate field. There are also things like criminal charges, hopefully that won't be relevant. Height in inches, those kinds of things are relevant for people like Olympic athletes, for instance, but not researchers usually. So just pick the ones that you think might be useful. So notable works or known for is a really, really helpful thing to have just summarized in a sentence in a box. You can also have awards and honors, just key things that you think, oh, I want to make sure that they are flagged up there on the right-hand side. You know, born, died, if that's relevant, citizenship, if it's relevant, but known for is really useful, and awards really useful. Institutions is also a handy thing to have. And you can find all that on their page as it already exists, without having to know anything about them. So that I would recommend as something to do, just to practice editing and make some changes and improvements to a page. And the really nice thing about adding an info box is that it makes a page look more finished. Are more likely to stay and read pages that have things other than blocks of text on them. So info boxes can actually encourage people to read and find out more. And also info boxes are really readable by things like Siri and Alexa. So when people ask these devices questions, one of the places they're very often pulling info from is Wikipedia, and particularly those boxes, because they're very machine readable. So that's a nice way of making someone more visible to a device and therefore more visible to other people.
I'm on Grazia Speranza, because she's done a talk at WORAN and I thought it should be relevant. So I just tried that, and all I've got up is her name, and then I tried add more information, and I don't know if I'm just, or maybe it's the information simply not on the page because it's such a scant page.
So all you need to do when you press edit, it won't automatically populate. You need to type it in. So you'll need to, if I put, so you'll have got as far as adding an info box for her. Sorry.
That's right.
So you'll probably have filled in her name, and then you can press insert, and the only thing that will show up is a box with her name.
But I did also click on add more information, and that wasn't.
So if you click add more information, you then get all of these options. You can click show 89 more fields. You can add these, and when you click on them, what happens? Sorry, I didn't explain that very well. Is that, for instance, if we were to click on education to add the place where she studied.
Okay.
Then it appears up here, so I can then type of Milan because I can see that. Oops.
Okay, so you actually have to do that manually. I thought
you have to do it manually.
Right. When you said automatic, I thought it just found it and put it in.
No, it automatically adds the box for you to then type into,
okay.
but not the information itself. Sorry.
Okay.
It's a really useful thing to do because it can then be automatically read. It can't be automatically added, but it can be automatically read by machines afterwards. So that's really
I'm with you.
Helpful thing to do. Sorry about that.
And it's finding it, except that the box appears right over the page.
It does. So what I do when I do this is I click on all the things I think I might like to include in that box on the right hand side, so that I've got them all ready to fill in, and then I just grab a notepad or notepad, you know, the app thing on the computer, and just make notes of all the answers so that I can then go back and add them all in, because you can't scroll up and down a page when that thing is over the top of it. So it's a really useful way of just think about everything you might like to include in that box on the right hand side. And it doesn't matter if you don't actually fill it in. Anything that you leave blank just won't appear. So
Alice, how do you change the order of those, or can you not?
You can't. So those will appear in a specifically generated order based on the template for info boxes. So it's just worth keeping in mind what information you add in, because if you're thinking, oh, this is going to bump some of the key things further down, then you might want to leave it off.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
And when it comes to biographies, that's worth keeping in mind as well. When you're writing about people, or when you're looking at people's page, you don't need to know anything about them to look at a page and think, it's kind of problematic that this page talks all about their husband and their children before it talks about their research, for instance. So it can be a really powerful thing just to edit a page, to do a bit of a tidy up and think, what is the first thing someone's going to read? What is the first thing someone needs to know? What is the order that this information appears in? Can I make that a bit better?
Is there a sort of etiquette for editing the info boxes for things like honours or education if someone went to 2 different unis or has a few different awards?
Usually it's either chronological or reverse chronological. If there are already a load listed, then go with whatever the order on the page is. If there's not an info box and you're adding one for the, just think about whatever way you would like to do it. I think for me, in terms of education, I usually do first institution first, so sort of master's, PhD, kind of in that order. For awards, though, I would usually conventionally do it the other way, and to have the most recent thing, which is usually, you know, the most important, usually career trajectories go up. So I would have sort of the biggest awards first, but it's entirely up to your discretion as the first person to put it in there, what you would like to go with.
Cool, thank you.
Another interesting thing about the first one to get their hands on a page is that the first person to create a page gets to choose whether it's American English or British English. So yeah, that can lead to some interesting things. So obviously the first person to get their hands on the page for operational research was an American, and that's why it's operations research instead of operational research.
No, another field that I found on the info box is the honorific prefix.
Yes.
Like, I know there's sort of a bit of a thing about women's titles, especially if it's like doctor or professor, being dropped sometimes. So I've gone and made sure I've called this person.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a really nice way to emphasize it, because Wikipedia page titles don't include honorific prefixes. Because they can change, and people don't want to be moving pages and updating page names all the time to reflect that. So it's useful to do it in an info box because it's so big and bold right up there to show it. And another thing, speaking about that, really useful thing to think about is when you're writing about someone in a biography page or when you're editing a page, is to think, are they referred to by their surname throughout? Because you often find that for some reason, women get referred to by their first names and men get referred to by their surnames. Like, oh, you know, she's a pal, but he is this respected, eminent, you know, person. So that's worth just checking and making sure. And it's especially easy to slip into if you know people is using their first names. So it's good to just think, oh, how do I want someone who's never met them sort of referring to them when they do first meet them?
Okay, I think I
so I've populating Wikipedia.
I've been busily trying to put up under Maria Grazia Speranza's page the YouTube link to her WORAN session, and I kept being unable to get the link. I just playing the old WORAN videos by mistake. But now I've got a link, but unfortunately it's just https://www. Does that matter, do you think, Alice? Doesn't look so good.
Let's have a look. So what you can do, I'll share my screen with you and show you. If you wouldn't mind popping the link in the chat, then I can show you how to.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Go. Remind me her name, I've forgotten. Maria
Speranza, Grazia Speranza is what you'll find.
That's it. There we go. Thank you. And I will show you what I would do. Okay. So if this is her page, nice info box, by the way, that looks very, very tidy. If I were to add this external link, if you just paste it in, oh, it's added something else because it's not letting me copy stuff out of the thing. Say it was this link, I know it's not. What you can then do is click on it so that it goes blue, and you can click change text. So it highlights it for you, and then you essentially can replace it with anything. Link to YouTube recording of talk for WORAN. Is it? It is AN, isn't it? Yeah. Network for the. You could then type something like that,
Right.
So all you need to do is click on the link basically and click the change text and then type what you would like the words to say instead of the link. And it just it keeps the URL pointing to the place that it's pointing to, but just changes the words that I used to say it. And on the info box, one thing that you can do to make it even more jazzy and useful is if you put 2 sets of square brackets either side of the university like that, or either side of a topic like that, and press apply changes, what should happen, you see links so that people can click on them. So if they say, oh, she's known for this, but what is that? They can then click on it and find their way to it nice and easily.
Excellent.
So it's not the most obvious thing in the world because that bit still relies on the old historic wiki code in the background, but square brackets do the magic with linking. Yeah, 2 pairs square brackets either side of the thing that you want to link to. The only thing with that is that sometimes you just have to check because the square brackets have to be around the exact wording of the page title that you want to link to.
Right.
And sometimes that doesn't tie up with where you want it to go, or you need to slightly correct something. So for instance, I notice on some people's info boxes, it might say, for instance, Cambridge University when the page is the University of Cambridge. So you just need to like shuffle things around to make sure that it works, but correctly in the link.
So these things do benefit from quite a lot of prior research and parallel screens and things.
So yeah, it can be really, really useful to just have another tab open that you can kind of flick back and forward to check stuff against and make sure that it, you know, is going to go where you think it's going to go and it's going to be useful. Oh, Beth's just left a great message. She just found out that Elsa was the first woman professor of operational research in Britain. So she's added that into the page.
Excellent.
That's amazing. Sometimes they're really quite remarkable, the things that get left off of people's pages.
Well, I suspect, yeah, it's a question of who did them when, I guess.
Exactly, who's created them and what their particular interest in a topic is. It can be very skewed. So yeah, it's nice though when you get to add something that you think, I thought everyone would have known this, but it's not there, so I get to add it.
Oh, excellent.
Alice, can you remind me how I add a contents thing box?
Ah, good question. So contents box actually will auto-generate once there are 3 or more headings. So basically, when you're editing an article, if you want to add a new heading, you just hit return so that you're on a new section. Right, and then highlight your text and use this paragraph button to just change it to a heading. And once you have 3 or more heading sections, it will automatically appear. You will notice that for some reason, the contents box vanishes when you're editing, because this page has more than 3 headings, but doesn't have a contents box. But as soon as I press save changes and go back to read mode instead of edit mode, the contents box would pop up. So the contents box just kind of gets itself out of the way whilst you're making changes, but it will be there as long as you've got 3 sections for people to want to jump between. And then you don't necessarily want to use your real name to edit. Some people do, some people don't. I didn't initially, but
Alice.
Yes.
It's very sad. I looked on the page, all my stuff is gone. So I'm looking on the history and it's there on the history.
Let's have a look.
What are you on, Ruth? I'm going to have a look.
I'm doing on M. Grazia Speranza, revision history. I'm logged in.
Yeah,
I chose a name and I've logged myself in.
Okay, so that was a bot. So what happens often is that there are bots that are set up to stop people just plugging loads and loads of stuff in. So hang on, let me share my screen. So this is where the history page really comes into its own and is really useful. So you can see all the changes that have been done to a page. And then you can see that the most recent change was by Xlink bot. The clue's usually in the name. So it's a piece of programming script that someone's created to just run in the background and go around looking for things that it thinks shouldn't be there. And in this case, it's a YouTube link. It thinks that the link shouldn't be there.
Right.
Because if we open the Xlink bot, we can see what it's been set up to do. So it's set up primarily to deal with domains that might have legitimate use on Wiki, but are frequently misused by new and anonymous users. So what it's been set up to do is to check for people adding links to YouTube videos that shouldn't be there, and not just YouTube videos, but things like Twitter, those kinds of things that generally shouldn't be used unless they're done correctly, to take them off. So what we can undo is we can undo that. We can undo the undo, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And just say why we're doing that.
So that's you that's doing that, not me?
No, that's me that's doing that. It will look a little bit better if it comes from me undoing, but then you, that's all. So now you can see this is what the page looks like and it's back there.
Right.
So sometimes, so what I did a really interesting Wikithon with some researchers at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and we were editing, the theme was LGBT studies. And a lot of the edits that they were doing were getting reverted by bots that are there to police for sort of schoolboy unhelpful things. So for instance, the researchers were talking about gay films in a genuine, like that's a genre, whereas sometimes that phrase might appear in articles in a much more unhelpful, illegitimate context. So there are bots to remove and just save editors the work of having to tidy up after people being daft in IT lessons, basically. So sometimes bots that have been set up to save a lot of time and effort catch things in their nets that they don't need to catch. So in those cases, it's useful to just know that you can check the history and see, oh, where did that go? What did that? Or who did that? And, you know, if you click on the name of whoever did it, you'll find out more about them or it, to know why that might have happened. So, for instance, if we look at the creator of this page, we find that the person who created this page is a computer science professor at UC Irvine, who really likes mathematics stuff. So they've probably got all the mathematics stuff you'd like to think quite well covered, but might be missing out on some of the other things on the page. And it can be quite interesting sometimes to have a look at who's edited a page and how that's ended up shaping what's there or missing.
Mm. Well, this is fascinating. I mean, it is. You just think I just need to set aside some time for it. There's so many.
Yeah.
I can see there's so many good intentions.
Yeah, it's a really worthwhile thing to do in terms of there's lots of different ways that it can be, you know, you can carry it on. You can set it as an assignment for students. That's a really popular one, is to get them, if not to do the edits, then at least to evaluate the page and get them really critically thinking, because they're inevitably going to go on there and have a look at things anyway. But if you set it as a task for them to actually critically evaluate it rather than just regurgitate it, that could be really, really useful. Another thing that you can do is, you know, do it as part of a fringe program, as a society, you know, a conference or a society gathering. That can be a really useful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can even get people to sort of do it as a sponsored activity potentially. So not that they get the money, but say we're going to spend a day doing some wiki editing, like a bit of a wiki marathon, if people want to donate to a charity to help motivate us, spur us to make some improvements. That can be a nice thing, or it can just be a nice thing to do. I often think in terms of researchers, it can be a really useful thing at the beginning or end of either writing something or doing a proposal or funding bid, because those are the stages when you're quite often thinking about the bigger picture, like what's currently out there, what's mentioned, what's not. And also you're likely to be thinking about what other people, what context your work is seen in by other people who might be either on a funding committee or who might be, you know, about to read or review your work. What else can they find out there that will be the wider context for this thing that I care about? And that's particularly useful for when your work is likely to be evaluated in some sense by people who are not super familiar with your particular subset of the discipline. So the bigger research councils and those kinds of things, sometimes for researchers that can be a helpful time to do it at the lit review stage or at the wrapping up stage when they're just tidying. And also those are the stages I personally find I'm most likely to be procrastinating like anything and likely to want to do anything except the task in hand. So it's quite a useful procrastination.
I just clicked on Sandbox.
Yeah.
And what I get is user : my username / sandbox.
Yeah, and it says this page does not exist yet. Do you want to create this page, or did you already click through to yes?
I didn't click through to yes because I didn't know if I wanted to click through to yes.
Yeah.
Actually, no, I seem to have clicked through to yes because it now says this is the user sandbox.
Perfect.
Oh,
so a user sandbox, first of all, it essentially asks you, do you want to create this sandbox to go and do your drafts in? And then it creates it for you. And the reason why it has a funny title is because it's a behind the scenes page.
Right.
So it's not indexed by Google. Nobody else sees it except you, really, unless you choose to email it a link to somebody and say, have a look at this draft, which you can do.
Right.
So it's sort of saved essentially as your name / sandbox, which is the equivalent, I guess, of saying, you know, notes, drafts, whatever it might be for this person in terms of the wiki structure. And then what you'll notice is that once you've typed anything in there and pressed save changes, at the top of your sandbox page, there's a box and it gets a big blue button that says submit your draft for review.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you can do once you've finished a draft in your Sandbox is click the big blue button, and then Wiki will send it off for peer review, and at some point somebody will pick it up and take a look at it. I always recommend to people who come to training events that it's really useful to drop me an email and ask me if I will have a look at it to review it, because Wiki peer review is much like academic peer review in that it can really, really, really take its time. It's reliant entirely on the goodwill of people to find some moments in their day to do it. And so it's good to ask someone to take a look who you know will probably prioritize you a little bit because you've met them before. So yeah, I'm always happy to receive emails saying, I've finished a draft, will you have a look, please?
Well, that's brilliant. And can I just click on this link and send that to you and you can see it?
Yeah, you can do, or else if you just, often I get people who've forgotten how to send me their Sandbox. So I will just give you a reminder. If you just say, I finished a draft, can you have a look at it? Then I'll say, yes, tell me your username, or yes, send me a link, and then I can take a look.
Great. That's brilliant. Oh. So, where are we?
Oh, so the dashboard is just updated. It's probably still not quite fully up to date, but so far, just today in today's session, just under 2,000 words have been added. 1,900 words have been added and 28 references. So although people aren't necessarily here and doing things, things are definitely happening.
Oh, wow. And
Could you post the link to the dashboard again? I lost.
Sorry?
Could you post the link to the dashboard?
Yeah, of course.
I lost it when I left.
Yeah, no problem.
So if I'm logged in, how do I also get to the dashboard?
You can just click on the link that I've just put in the chat and you should be able to find your way there.
Okay.
And like I said, this will continue to do its thing for the next week and capture the different edits that people are doing. So
I ignore that bit that says log in and sign up.
so you'll need, well, you don't need to, but ideally you'll sign in so that we can capture your edits. I think.
Right, so how do I sign in to you?
So if you just say yes, that you're happy to sign in, and then you'll be taken back to Wikipedia and it will say, are you okay with this dashboard looking at what you're doing? And you say yes, and then it will take you back to the dashboard. So it's kind of go away to come back situation.
Right. Okay, so I'll put in allow. Great.
So that means that we weren't even capturing your edit, so there'll be when it does its next pass over everything.
So now that I'm there, do I need to write down that link? Will I be able to? I won't be able to see it unless I click on that link. So I need to take that link away with me. Is that right?
So what we can do is I'll send out a link with some useful resources, and then I'll include the link to the dashboard so that people can find their way back to it if they, because it's been pasted in the chat, but it's easy to close Zoom and go, oh no, I didn't make a note of that anywhere. I can't get back to it. So we can do that.
So yeah, it'd be great if there are like links to other things, any other things as well. We can just send around to all the participants and just sort of
that would be great. And then we can make sure there's the feedback survey as well. Because I don't think you're going to get much. I think this has been so interesting.
Yeah, it's been really good. I'm sorry it's sort of it's petered out a bit in terms of numbers, but I've it's been really good refresher for me, and I feel like
no, that's good. It's completely understandable. People, can sort of come and go, and we made that clear in the advertising that it was people were very welcome to come and go, and that's fine. So then
you.